Welcome to the Brainstorm episode 59. Today we're talking hours saved with AI, value capture. Brett, what did Amazon just do, and is it giving us any clues as to whether or not you can charge thousands and thousands of dollars for AI helpers?
Well, I think it's definitely giving us some evidence that AI is useful. So Amazon, and maybe it's an open question as to whether or not that gives companies license to charge thousands of dollars for AI helpers. Amazon announced that, deploying their own internal AI systems, they were able to upgrade all of their servers to the newest version of Java, and the process would have taken 4,500 developer years to do it. And they did it in 50 developer days. So if you do the math, they saved about $500 million in upgrading their servers. And they, in doing so, they generated $250 million in annual cost efficiencies and operational efficiencies, at least by their estimates. So they saved $500 million, and then they got $250 million a year. So it's a major kind of productivity advance for Amazon. And clearly, if they had been forced to pay for that, they should have paid a large sum. Since they're using their own internal systems, it's amortized CapEx. So it's not clear that they paid much of anything.
Yeah. And I think another dynamic, right? Or it's 2 10x engineers and then it's only 450 developer years. But it's like you never have a 10x engineer doing that type of project to begin with, which is separate conversation to go into. But right, I heard this news and it connected the dots with how we've been talking about AI, and also a slide that was presented at Cotu's East Meets West, right? And it's framing how do you justify the return on investment in all of these AI infrastructure projects that people are building out. And it's typically split into two, right? You get the cost saving side, which I think the Amazon is a great example. Or you get the revenue generation side and you take a cut of that. And at least as I began to think about it, these might seem equal to the customer, but I think it's extremely difficult for the company who's providing it to capture value in as efficient way if it's cost savings as opposed to revenue generation. Right. So it's like what makes the Apple Store so powerful is that it's off of revenue generation. What makes, at least in our modeling, the autonomous opportunity so profound is revenue capture. Right. And it's like things that lead to cost savings. So 3D printing, I think, would be an example. Right. You can do things that you could never do before, but that leads to like savings and efficiencies, and extremely difficult to capture that value, because it almost just goes to the end customer as opposed to the supplier. And so I know you've got context, you've got more history than I do in thinking about these things, but this is something that I want to talk through, because in my mind, it seems like those two are not actually equal.
Yeah. I mean, and just to kind of like highlight call it current controversy in the marketplace, NVIDIA's selling like $100 billion plus of AI chips into its server segment. And if you do the math, well, gosh, people need to be generating, depending on how you run the numbers, $600 or $700 billion in revenue to justify kind of the CapEx that they are investing in these chips. And where does that revenue lie? Where can we find it? And some are arguing, well, it's not going to be anywhere. And so then kind of it's nice for all these companies to spend a lot of money on NVIDIA chips so we can all have very useful language models, but they're never going to recoup their investment. I agree with your framing that it's easier to attach a business model to revenue generation because the company is bringing new revenue in the door. You can always just take a cut. And there's plenty of business models that have worked that way. You know, if you think even genetically modified crops, Monsanto's pitch to farmers was always, we'll increase your yield by 15% and we'll just take effectively a platform fee that you'll pay for our seeds in order to increase yield by that amount. Or the App Store is another great example. And I think over time, the cost efficiency side also can be a valid business model, but maybe monetization doesn't happen as immediately. And so if you think about enterprise software and kind of the pitch that enterprise software makes to companies is give your employees this tool and they'll be more productive. You basically won't have to hire an additional employee to do a task in order to get the same amount of stuff done. And they infiltrate the organization sufficiently that they can raise prices, and an organization has a hard time, moving on to another platform. And so I think that there is a delay in kind of like the monetization capture, but assuming the product is either differentiated or sticky enough, ultimately I think that the platform fee should resolve to roughly the same amount.
Do you think that's true though? It's like, it seems, even if you look at like Microsoft Suite, maybe they're actually capturing more value that way because there's alternatives to all of those and no one uses them, right? Everyone could use Google Sheets or whatnot. But it's like, I feel like it's much harder to capture all of the value or even to really become a defensible player if you're only on the cost saving side.
Well, I think, or take the Amazon example, there's, cost savings ultimately results in revenue generation in some way. So I think an interesting question for Amazon, and you alluded to it, is if you could just spend $500 million on developer hours and get yourself $250 million in cost efficiencies per year going forward, clearly that would have been good money to spend even before you had an AI system. Like, why did you wait to do that until this AI system was available? And it's because it's not kind of like their core business. You wouldn't onboard a lot of developers to do it because there's inefficiencies in hiring people and getting them motivated and getting them aligned on doing it. It's boring and laborious work that, was probably on somebody's rank of things to do. It just never was a focus because there was such it's a big number, but for Amazon, within the context of their business, it's a relatively small number. Ultimately, though, that $250 million in cost savings also provides a lot of operational agility. Like, there's a lot more stuff that they'll be able to do having made that upgrade. And I think the same is true for kind of getting onto a software ecosystem that, yes, it prevents you from having to hire someone. Also, if it's well designed, it helps you do more and generate more revenue. And kind of, it means you hire in more employees. And if it's a per seat pricing, that results in more pricing for kind of like the companies enabling that behavior. And I think that there's ultimately kind of like they're just two sides. They're like the revenue line or the OpEx line on the income statement. Companies will optimize to ultimately their profitability. And so, they will pay for either one. I think there is a difference in like just being able to like take revenue before it flows into the company, I think, rather than try to charge afterwards.
Or what
it's
about
almost like yeah, go on, Nick.
Or I was going to say, what about even just thinking about, it's almost like a call option versus puts, right? Whereas for me, the difficulty is if you're going on the cost saving side, right? It's like the most you can make is it goes to zero, right? And so then it's like from a competition side, I'm saving you money. A competitor comes and says, okay, I'll save you another 5 cents. And then someone comes in and say, I'll save you another 5 cents. And then, next thing you know, it's a commodity product. Whereas if you're in the revenue side, like if someone, it doesn't matter because it's all upside. And it's like, that's where you can truly grow and, compete on different things, but it's not, revenue generation doesn't lead to commoditization. And at least from what we've seen, AI thus far has been cost saving dominated.
Well,
within existing companies, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couldn't on the revenue side too, you see commoditization? As in, what I find so fascinating about this space is there really is no serious moat to building software products anymore. Where it used to be, you had to go out and find the best talent to create the best product, and it was part infrastructure, so physical, and now also software. Obviously, today it's just you rent cloud and you deploy this large language model. And in every instance where we've seen a product come out that's built on a large language model, within the next week or two, we see an open sourced free version of it. And so I find it very hard to believe that there is a ton of opportunity from what we're seeing today. And I think that it's, massively potentially deflationary. And then also just, I think a lot of this will be commoditized out and bundled, right? I think, Sam, you had alluded to it before, but bundling is extremely powerful in the software stack. And it's why you don't see companies able to flex the pricing power they might have, because you always have someone bigger out there willing to give away what you've built for free. Like the amount of services we have as consumers and enterprises for free for relatively no cost that we rely extremely heavily on is actually like insane. Like I'll just think about a mapping service, right? It's free. I couldn't go 5 miles from my house without turning on a map. And that should be something that, to the value it provides to me, something I'm willing to pay for. But yet I don't, because it's given to me for free. And there's thousands of examples of this across both the consumer and the enterprise side. And I think AI just accelerates what companies will be willing to give away for free.
I think that's true. And I think there's a difference between the consumer side versus the enterprise side. The mapping services are interesting because you did used to have to pay, and now you don't. And if you own various legacy automakers, you still have to pay for the mapping system on their stupid infotainment screen, which seems insane. And at least Google monetizes that to some degree through advertising. So there's indirect monetization. Right. On the enterprise side, I think you said something that I think is an important point with regards to this discussion. If you're doing revenue capture, if you're saying, I'm going to deliver you revenue and I'm just going to take a percentage of that, you are also guaranteeing performance of the underlying software, right? And so it's almost like if you're doing cost efficiencies, you're asking a company to pay you up front for something on the promise that it will deliver cost efficiencies. If you're doing revenue capture, you're saying, I'm going to yield you additional revenue, and you're really only paying me for demonstrating that performance. So it's actually a business model attached to a performance guarantee. Obviously, it's easier to charge somebody something as the performance is delivered rather than trying to charge them up front on the promise of future performance. And so I think that's one way there's a shift. And particularly with AI systems, there is a lot of drift between kind of like the prototype and the actual product being delivered across all of the models in all of the systems right now. And so if I were to imagine kind of an AI system that is going to monetize very well and establish a good competitive moat, I would probably be trying to design to something that goes out there and generates revenue, because then you don't really care. You're just like, oh, this is an AI sales agent that can call 30,000 numbers at a time and kind of generate incremental sales for me. And it's just taking, a share of the transactions it facilitates. That is a product that would be, once deployed, hard to displace, because suddenly you have, like Google AdWords, you have like lots of revenue dependent upon kind of like that particular product. And so you're loath to be like, oh, I'm going to try to rip and replace this with something else, which then will interrupt this revenue stream that you've identified.
Mm-hmm. Why haven't we seen more of those yet? Or you think that's the next wave that's coming?
I think those take, longer to develop, probably. I think AI systems generally are probably underperformant relative to the more aggressive use cases that businesses are trying to deploy them into. And at a certain capability threshold, they suddenly will be able to. But it's also probably a function of kind of, Nick, as you described, companies release AI models, then other companies are building on top of them, trying to build services. Most of the ones doing the most innovative stuff are, startups that are scrappy. And there's been a seasoning cycle on the GPT-4 models where they're beginning to come out of stealth now. So there was a company, Bland, I think it's called, that has like a general purpose AI phone answering agent. You can assign it to anything, but you could certainly imagine assigning it to cold calling customers to try to sell something. And there's reason to believe that these systems, when you get a call from somebody who is trying to sell you something, it is uniformly a terrible experience. Like, these people are reading off a script. It's bad enough that anybody who's like operating in the modern world immediately susses out that's what this person is doing and immediately disconnects, right? And then there's some class of probably elderly people who want to talk to somebody and then end up getting sold a magazine subscription or donating to a nonprofit that they don't even know what it does, right? And so you can imagine that like the design of the system to call people, it suffers a lot of translation error into the people who have the mind-numbing job of calling, 500 phone numbers an hour or whatever. I think their throughput rate's actually much lower, and getting hung up on all the time. And so an AI system probably is going to end up being better at this and more persuasive, more measurable, and can do it at scale. And so I think that the kind of like the idea of cold calling, it probably will shift over onto these systems, and that'll, I'm not saying Bland is necessarily going to be the company that does it, but it certainly is a way that you could kind of attach revenue to the amount that's being spent on these systems that then will kind of like at scale make them more effective at cold calling customers.
Well, okay, I have a question just on that example, and I guess maybe it goes back to my prior point, but like that example, I think the terminology out there is like it's an LLM wrapper. So you're wrapping a product around like, they're probably using some large LLM for the data and then they fine tune it.
Yeah.
How defensible is that, right? Like, okay, that is a great use of AI. I don't doubt that. I actually think that's a genius idea. But then you have people that understand this, and then, how long does it really take to build a competing product? And that's where I have this issue of, okay, yes, there's a lot of use cases for AI. So much so that you're just going to have so many startups in this space, and they're able to push product at a pace we have never before seen in technology. And so to me, that's where it comes back to, I think, Sam's overarching point. How do you have pricing power in a highly competitive space? And what actually does end up separating out these companies if the underlying technology that is driving the product itself is available to everyone? Like, there's no defensibility around the actual
that's always
language
been
model
true.
Powering.
Yeah,
well, I think
think about software.
It's been true, but you've had
famously, like anytime a software as a service product was released, people on, I can't remember, is it Slack Overflow or Reddit forums would be like, oh, I could code that. Of course you could. Like there's not some secret sauce going on in the back end of software as a service companies where they have some specialized coding talent that is unavailable to other people. And like making a performant system that people know how to use is the combination of kind of like the underlying technology. It's kind of your way in which you educate and onboard customers. It's the way the system performs in response to kind of customers, and like your ability to adapt to what the market wants. And so I think that there's no reason why Appfolio, which does multifamily apartment rental management, couldn't be duplicated, couldn't be built on top of like Salesforce or any other platform, or be duplicated by somebody else who's like, I'm going to develop software that does this thing. If anything, AI actually has more defensible characteristics because you're like better able to feed customer behavior back into the system and improve it than you are with traditional software.
I agree to the extent that you still, like with the Appfolio example and just, human created software, the human element is what is necessarily defensible and is what gives you the lead time to build a product that outcompetes newer entrants. But with AI, at least what we've seen so far, you don't have that lead time anymore. Like there's a reason these companies are probably staying in stealth longer than, prior. And I'm totally making an assumption here, but my guess is these AI companies are staying in stealth longer because as soon as you come out to market, the time it takes to recreate that product is vastly different than before we had this generative AI functionality. So like, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. But think about this, like over the course of the last 2 decades, the ease with which you can launch and deploy software has definitely compressed, even before AI. Over the last 3 decades, like infrastructure as a service, all of the platform as a service, it's definitely lowered the amount of capital you need to get to market with a product. The result, I would argue, hasn't been that there's only a few software companies. Actually, the number of software companies that are occupying kind of interesting and profitable niches has exploded. And the attributable software market cap has grown, not shrunk. And kind of like the mega cap tech companies have also grown much larger. And so I think it's actually a positive sum situation. It could be that like your incremental roll of the die has lower odds, but the company that like works and sticks then can get bigger. Much bigger,
Yeah.
But
that's good framing.
Yeah. I feel like from this conversation, it does seem like more power accrues to the firm than the software.
To the
itself.
firm, what do you mean?
Well, it's like distribution, marketing, exactly what you're saying, UI, UX, support. It's like all of this becomes incrementally more important if the differentiator isn't purely software based.
But software has not been the differentiator all along, I don't think. I don't think that people like the software has to perform, but it's always been like your ability to get in front of customers, deliver value to them instantaneously, kind of have like a good penetration strategy into the enterprise. I don't know if there's if anything, what I see as different with AI that makes it challenging is that even the developers of the software actually don't know how it's going to perform. And so you are really dependent upon getting a product that gets into customers' hands that happens to work. And you don't know what it's going to be capable of. And a lot of the engineering effort is in trying to constrain it down into areas where there is like a higher degree of certainty of what it's going to do, it's just different. And you could argue the Bland company, their pitch is, hey, it's an AI system, but it's not going to confabulate and, like make up stuff for customers. Now we'll see if that actually happens and works. But they would, I would say, probably react allergically to the idea that they're an AI wrapper, because they see all of their value add as the way in which they are allowing people to constrain the conversations and drive them towards certain outcomes that they want, without the AI sales agent accidentally offering the customer, a truck worth $30,000 for $500 because the customer is a good negotiator, and so I think
that might make it worse than a human, right? Everyone knows a good business development person's offering them something that engineering hasn't done yet.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that the one thing I'd say is that your worst sales agent can be very bad, and kind of an AI system in the wrong circumstances can also operate poorly. And so the reason, and kind of circling back to the original point here, the reason to be on the revenue capture side rather than on the, cost saving side is at least somebody is paying only contingent on performance, rather than being I'm going to pay for this thing. And I'm hoping by the end of the year, it'll be saving me money. The unpredictability of these systems probably means that paying based on performance is something that people will be a lot more comfortable with, rather than kind of buying up front and then hoping that it delivers.
Mm-hmm. All right. That was a wide-ranging discussion, but I think we learned. Did we learn? Brett, what did you learn?
I learned.
I did most of the talking. Nick, what did you learn?
No, I think you framed it in a way that I hadn't necessarily thought about it before, when it comes to the explosion potential of software, in that because the costs now to deploy software are so low with generative AI, you can actually deploy more customized software into smaller niches than previously were off limits, because the cost to create software for this specific vertical just didn't make sense monetarily. The market's not big enough to actually build customized software. So that market just has to adapt to more generalized software. But now I think with generative AI, you will have a lot of startups go after these very niche markets and build customized software because the cost to do it is so low. And I think, the Sam Altmans of the world have framed it, there will be a one-person unicorn. And I guess that kind of mindset trickles down to, you'll have one person, $100,000, $200,000 customized software solutions going after markets you don't even know about, because it wasn't worth spending time there. But now you can do that. So I think that was helpful.
I think there's a good theoretical chart that can be drawn. People love the smile curve, all those simple things, but it's clearly there's a supply curve similar to mining for enterprise software niche. Yes.
And at some point you cross a threshold where the cost of development is so low that you don't need your specialized need is so specific that you're not going to rely on an outside vendor to provide that. Right. Instead, you enable the, knowledge worker who's right out on the edge to just develop the software themselves. And that's why a platform like Replit or any of these, it's why the coding platforms are the interesting spot to occupy right now. In AI, it's because, if it all disappears inside the firm rather than going to outside vendors, then there's still the opportunity to capture some of the productivity that's being yielded.
Interesting. I think it still leaves a question of pricing power and the amount of with the way that you just ended it, Brett. Now I'm back to thinking, okay, there's going to be not a lot of revenue opportunity, because if you can just build something for yourself, how do you charge for that? But yeah, it's an interesting debate. I don't know that we'll have an answer until we have it's hard to predict.
All right, we'll end it there. Obviously, a live discussion, so drop comments. I'm sure some people will be insightful and others will be hurtful.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. All right. See
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
next week.
All right. Thank you.